Hey, before we get to today's great episode, wanted to let you know of a new exciting thing going on for the Lounge. For the first time since we started this podcast, the Lounge has entered into a partnership with a company that is aligned in how we think. Completely stop gambling. So Betttr is giving away 200 free subscriptions for life to the first 200 users from this podcast. Download Betttr, find the link in the show notes, or searching Betttr in your app store. So it's Betttr, BETTR, quit gambling. Search for that on the App Store or click into the link in the podcast show notes. So I'll see you on Betttr. And now to today's episode. Hey everyone, it's Eric. Welcome into the Gambling Recovery Lounge. Hey, before we begin today's great episode, I just wanted to let you know that we've set up an opportunity for individuals to donate to the show. I've been asked by several people how they can contribute to the great cause. And, this podcast is personal. It's about the raw, often hidden struggle of gambling addiction and the hope that comes with recovery. And, we're really pouring our heart into telling these stories, but producing it and editing it and publishing it, it does take real resources. So if you believe in the mission, even a few dollars can make a big difference. So every donation is going to help keep this project going, hopefully for a long time to come. So if you can donate even a few bucks, we certainly appreciate it. And the GoFundMe link is in the show notes. And thank you for being a part of this. And now we're going to get to today's great episode. Thanks for joining us. Welcome into the Gambling Recovery Lounge. My name is Eric, and I'm a compulsive gambler in recovery. And the date of my last bet was June 15th of 2021. It is good to be back in the Recovery Lounge with everybody. This is going to be experience number 18, and I'm really excited about today's interview with my friend and sister in recovery, Lori, joining us today. And let me bring Lori in. Lori, how's it going?
It is going fantastic. Thank you, Eric. How are you?
I am doing so well. Super excited. Lori and I met probably a little over a year ago, I think, in the recovery rooms. And, one of the great parts about this recovery space we're in is you never know who you're going to meet and when you're going to meet them. And occasionally somebody comes into your world and they just kind of take off and you make a great connection. And that's kind of the story between Lori and I. So super excited to have her on sharing her story today. With that, Lori, we're going to start the way we always start the show. We're going to ask you to first talk about the recovery song that you've chosen that you relate to your journey. So tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, that was a difficult question for me because I love so much music, but I had never really thought about a song that would really resonate with and be a good depiction of my recovery. So it took me a little while, but then I finally came up with Survivor by Destiny's Child. It's really written, to like, breaking up with a partner, kind of thing. Like you thought I couldn't live without you, but I can. But really, it's like breaking up with gambling. You thought I would fail and never make anything of myself without gambling. And I absolutely have thrived and succeeded. And I feel so much better now that it's not in my life. So that song really resonates.
I love that. It reminds me too of Goodbye to Gambling letter that I wrote. That whole like something was this huge relationship in your life for so long, and then you kind of had this breakup, and how do you say goodbye, and then ultimately bury the thing, right? So
Yes.
which is where we want to keep it. Yeah, cool. All right, so that's Survivor by Destiny's Child. Check it out, and I'm sure it's going to relate. So thank you for sharing that, Lori.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so we're going to start diving in your story, Lori. So maybe to kick us off, first, if you give us your recovery date, and then maybe just a little bit about your childhood. How did things kind of evolve for you in the family unit, and kind of what starts to happen for you as growing up and that kind of thing. And we'll eventually morph into when gambling starts to rear its ugly head into Lori's life.
Yeah, it's funny. I always count my days, but my recovery date, I guess, is December 1st, 2022. Yeah. December 1st, 2022 was my last bet or
Excellent.
my first
So
day in recovery. So two
great.
years, 3 months, and 30 days. Yeah.
Awesome.
29 days.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Yeah. And, there's a lot of people that ask themselves, like, oh, what was it in my life that kind of started me gambling? Or was there something that happened that may have led to the fact that I became a compulsive gambler? And some people get that answer right away, and some people never get that answer. And I think in the literature, it kind of says, is it really that important? Do we have to know or not to recover? Not necessarily. But I think for some people, it does help to have that understanding. And for me, it's really easy to see where gambling started for me in my life and with my childhood, because my father was a compulsive gambler, an alcoholic, a womanizer, all of those things. So he wasn't around very much. And then my mother struggled greatly with mental illness and with his treatment of her and his neglect of her and the family. And so she was really resentful towards him. And then she took that out on me
Mm,
because I kind of resembled him and reminded her of him. And so, I was the whipping post for her anger at my father for not being around. And they split when I was 7.
mm.
So I kind of went back and forth between whichever parent was capable of taking care of me at the time.
Interesting. Okay. Now, were
Yeah.
you were too young to really understand what was happening in terms of the
Yeah. I
behaviors and
remember
such?
there was an Easter when I was very young, maybe 5 or 6 years old. And we wake up, we go downstairs in our pajamas to get our Easter baskets from the Easter Bunny, and there are no baskets, and my dad is not around. And I remember my mom just crying and being really upset. And I was little, I didn't understand what was happening. But then my dad strolls in later that morning with a bunch of baskets. Look what I found out in the parking lot. Look what I got for you guys, what the Easter Bunny brought. And at the time I was like, oh, they came. I'm so excited, But then as I got older and I realized what had happened, my dad would spend all night gambling and not come home for sometimes days and spend a lot of the family money. He had a good job, he made a good living, but a lot of his money went towards gambling. So we were always struggling
Mm,
when they were together. And like I said, they split when I was 7, and then it was just kind of tumultuous.
got it.
Um,
So, any siblings?
I have 3 brothers, 2 older, 1 younger,
Okay.
and we all had kind of different experiences because of the age gaps. So my 2 older sisters were with both my parents for a good chunk of time before I came along.
Hmm.
And then my younger sister, there was 4 years between us, so she didn't experience some of the same things that I did, and I didn't experience some of the same things my older sisters did. The gambling was definitely a part of the family. And
Mm,
then my childhood was very, very tumultuous and dysfunctional and full of neglect and abuse. So I know a lot of that played into my addiction.
hmm.
But also, I've worked really hard to overcome those challenges, and to not let them define me in a negative way.
Right. We're gonna get into all of that. So as they now separate, and I assume you're kind of going back and forth between two different homes, the custody situation. So as you now start to get older, what do you start to experience relative to both situations? And then how does that start to really affect what happens in your day-to-day life, maybe as you're getting into teenage years, or however that happened for you?
When they first split, I think I stayed with my dad. My sisters and I all decided we wanted to stay with our dad because, at least as absent as he wasn't physically abusive. So where my mom was very physically abusive. So we stayed with my dad, and then his gambling, his drinking, he was not around. My oldest sister really took care of us for a long time, and then went to go live with my mom when I was about 10, I think.
Mhm.
And I stayed there for a few years, again, in just a very unhappy home. And then when my mom had a really bad breakdown when I was about 13 years old, she was taken away to mental hospital. And I was taken away to a foster home with my younger sister to
Mm.
live, because she was in the hospital. And then my dad found out about us being in a foster home, and we were moments away from becoming wards of the state when my dad stepped in and came and took us to live with him. And that really was a big turning point because he had stopped drinking. He would gamble still, but not to the extent that he did before. So it was a little bit of a stability in my life at that point when I went to live with him and my stepmom at 13.
Was he
And that
in recovery programs for those
they
addictions?
were, yeah,
Okay.
he was in the alcoholics or AA or whatever for his drinking addiction. but nothing for the gambling. So gambling was part of my life with my dad and my stepmom. We they would go up to Tahoe or to gamble all the time. Take my younger sister and I with them and dump us off in the arcade with a bucket of quarters for hours while they
Mm,
gambled. And we played video games and walked around and unsupervised. For that was a big part of my life. And I learned how to play poker at 13 on one of those trips. I was
mm.
taught how to deal, how to play, all those things. So gambling was always
Or
around
normalized.
and normalized.
Right.
Scratchers were Christmas gifts in our stockings. Our Christmas stockings. We would get
Got it.
scratchers way before I was even old enough to gamble.
Okay.
But it was
Okay.
very normalized. There was no negative stigma around it, and we never had a lot of money, but we always had a roof over our heads and food on the table when I did live with my dad. But we never had anything extra. Uh, and this is a fun little side that I always forget to mention about my dad. He was a horse racing handicapper. Like that was his dream job as a compulsive gambler, or what?
Okay.
And he
Oh,
handicapped all the races for all of the tracks up in the Bay Area. And then every
wow.
summer when I was in college, I would actually go up and work at the horse races at the fairgrounds for him
Mm,
and sell for 2 weeks of the fair, one fair, and I would sell his tip sheet. And that's actually when I was exposed to horse racing, and I never liked it. I never won on any bet
mm,
that I ever made on a horse.
right.
And I was like, well, why do people do this? This is ridiculous to me. And so thankfully that was not part of my gambling addiction, but it certainly could have been.
Yeah, you a bad analogy, I guess. You were bred for it from
I, I was. I
as we'd
really
say in the
was.
horse racing world.
Yes,
That
definitely.
that is so funny. Well, I wish I hadn't gotten into it, but it was certainly a big part of my story. Okay, so now you're going through school, I assume, and living your life. And so, what maybe starts to happen, whether it's gambling or any other thing that may start to happen?
Yeah, because I moved back and forth so much. I went to 9 different schools. So I
Mm,
went to 5 elementary schools, 2 middle schools, 2 high schools. And one of the things that was really difficult was as soon as I would get comfortable, as soon as I would feel safe, as soon as I would make some friends and feel like this is where I belong, I would be uprooted and moved somewhere else and have to start over and have to make new friends and have to find my way. And but the hardest one I think was 11th grade, was my junior year when I had to switch schools in high school. I think that was really the hardest time because people have their friendships, they have their relationships, they have their groups set, and it's very hard to break into those when you're new or different. And I was always a little bit of a spitfire. I always had way too much energy, way too much hyperaction or whatever. And so some people sometimes in high school that was a little too much. So it was hard.
mm,
And I really didn't even think about gambling. I didn't gamble at the time. It wasn't a part of my, anything really and even when I went away to college, I think I was a freshman in college and I dated this guy and he was a big gambler. And
mm.
I was like, no, that's horrible. It ruins lives. You can't do that. It was a total turnoff for me. It was interesting how a few years later, when I turned 21 and got my first trip to Vegas, how that all kind of changed.
Oh, that's where it started for me too, the change. So, all right, so let's talk about that. So, what happens? You go to Vegas at 21.
For 21st birthday, my parents, that was my trip. And I think I had $200 for the weekend. And I had never, and I went around and I was not lucky. I didn't win at all. I left that trip with no money. And then, it just became like I would go to Vegas here, I would go to Vegas there. It wasn't, it was a 4-hour drive from Southern California where I was going to school. So, sometimes my friends would be like, let's go. We'd just get in the car and drive out, and we wouldn't even get a room. We would just gamble through the night and turn around and drive back the next day. And again, they talk about it being a progressive illness. I was not a compulsive gambler when I first would gamble. It was once, twice a year, maybe a little
Right.
bit of money here and there. And that was it. And I didn't think about it. I didn't fiend over it. I wasn't always, but it definitely over the years, which I'm obviously we'll get to, it
Right.
got progressively worse.
And when you started gambling, you had no financial issues. You were not even gambling moderately to try to solve a financial problem. It was
No,
just a fun.
it was just for fun. Yeah, it was not a financial thing at all. I mean, I grew up very, very poor. We didn't ever have any money. When I was living with my mom, we were on welfare, getting government cheese and food stamps, all of that. So I never had any money. And then when I was in college, I was pretty much working through college and paying for myself to then getting grants and loans and things like that. So I just had enough money to survive.
Yeah.
I really didn't have a lot of extra money, but
Okay.
once in a while I would go gamble, but it wasn't a big problem then.
Okay, so now you're back from the Vegas trip, and so what's going on in life now? What starts to happen?
Yeah, so I went to after college. I graduated college without a dime to my name. Like I was broker than broke. And so I moved back up to San Francisco Bay Area with my dad and my stepmom, and I stayed with them for a while. And that's when, every once in a while we would go out and we would gamble together. I was a kind of a bonding time with my dad, which was I thought at the time was kind of cool because, we didn't
Hmm.
really have a lot that we bonded over. But yes, we definitely did that. And then I will only stayed up there for a little while just to make some money so I could come back to Southern California and live here because this is really where I always wanted to be. Growing up in the Bay Area and Southern California, I always preferred Southern California. Just enjoyed it. So came back down here and started working, found a few different jobs. My bachelor's degree was in theater and I was going to be or I wanted to be an actor or
Oh, okay.
actress, but it was such a difficult job or career to try to make a living at. And I didn't want to wait tables. I thought there's nothing wrong with waiting tables. I just felt like for me, I wanted to do something else, with my life. And I didn't know
Hmm.
what that was going to be yet, but I knew it was going to be, I needed to do something else. I just wasn't sure. So
Got it.
I spent
Was there a
I
particular kind of acting or theater you studied in college?
Well, in college, it's just basic theater,
Got it.
but I loved it. I really did. I've always enjoyed performing since I was very small. I think because of, my childhood and the neglect and the abuse, it was my escape. Acting was my escape from reality,
Mm, mm,
And then it's interesting that later on, my escape became gambling,
yeah,
once the acting wasn't really happening anymore.
very interesting. Okay, so you're working some jobs and living life, and were you now dating in a relationship at this point, or?
So I had a few long-term boyfriends in college. Nothing, they kind of ended. And then after, during my transitional period when I had those different jobs, I would date, but I didn't have. Well, I guess I did have one long-term boyfriend, and I wanted to marry him, and he didn't want to marry me. We would go to Vegas together sometimes too. He liked to gamble also, but then we broke up because he didn't want to marry me. And at
Mm,
that, I'm still in my early 20s, but when you're a girl in your 20s and you're like, oh, you want to get married, you want to have a wedding, and then I was kind of lost. I was working an office job and I wasn't really feeling fulfilled. I was making a decent living, but it wasn't anything, I wasn't happy.
hmm.
And I decided, well, I'd always said I was either going to be a movie star or a teacher. So maybe what I'll do is I'll become a teacher. So I looked into grad school, which I had never thought about grad school, but the miracle that I graduated college school. And then I was like, well, I'll try it. I'll apply. And I applied and I got in and became a teacher.
Wow. What did you get your master's in?
It was in elementary education.
Okay.
For a girl from the ghetto, like no role models or
Yeah.
anything. It was pretty amazing that I got that far.
So what was your first teaching job then?
I taught fourth grade. I
Mm,
taught for 5 years. My last year of teaching was actually at a private school where a lot of celebrities sent their kids. But then I realized that kids, no matter what their background, they need good teachers. And just because a kid lives in a multi-million dollar home and has three nannies doesn't mean that they're getting the love and attention that they need to have a healthy, successful life. So, kids are just kids. And some
mm,
of them come from really rich families, and some of them come from families that have very little.
got it.
But really what matters is the love, that they get and the attention that they get.
And now, so as you're embarking on the teaching career, if I could take a step back, what was happening back in your relationships with your parents specifically in terms of what was there healing that was going on from, we'll say, the childhood stuff?
It's a little tricky, especially with my mom. My relationship with my mom was always very strained. When I was in college, she was living about 2 hours away down in San Diego, and she was always getting into trouble. She was always having issues, and I was always having to go down and try to bail her out. So it was tricky with my mom. With my dad and my stepmom, they stepped up to be parents to me at this time, and we worked on a relationship. It was never super warm and loving, but it was stable. And I would go home, I would go back to the Bay Area to visit my dad and my stepmom for all the holidays, for the summers, things like that. So
Hmm.
I did have a relationship with them.
Okay.
But my mom, no, she didn't. She really didn't want to have anything to do with me. And then ultimately, she pulled away. And then the few times I would reach out to reconnect with her, would always end up with me in tears, very traumatized. So
And that's
I,
still the case
and
today?
that's still today.
Mm,
Yeah, my mom and I do not talk. I tried to call her maybe a year ago,
mm,
because I talked to my cousin who was in touch with her. Like the only person in my family who's in touch with my mom is my cousin, and so I got her number and I tried to call her, and she saw my name and didn't answer. And so
mm,
I've tried, and I can live with that, because a long time ago I had to make the decision: am I going to live with the guilt of having no relationship with my mom, or am I going to live with the embarrassment and the misery of being in a relationship with my mom because she was so mean. She was
mm.
really just sometimes just plain mean, and she was very eccentric. So whenever we would go out, she would say very weird, off the cuff things that would always, I lived in a perpetual state of embarrassment, which, now it like takes a lot to embarrass me because I don't really care what people think that much. But, growing up, it was hard. And
Yeah.
then my dad passed away about over 20 years ago, 22 years ago.
Are you still in a have a relationship with your stepmom? No.
No,
Got it.
when my
Okay.
dad passed away, everything kind of imploded with my sisters and my stepmom. Like
Okay.
he was the glue kind of keeping us together.
Okay.
And when he passed away, we just didn't have that. And there were too many strong personalities
Okay.
amongst us to keep that going.
Got it. So you're still fragmented with your sisters as well, even to at this point.
Even
Okay.
today.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for sharing all that. I mean, it's always important, I think, before we get into the addiction piece to go through the history, because I think we always find for all of us that it began much earlier with something else, and it is normally around some kind of trauma in our lives. In my case, it was realizing I was different as a gay kid, and I went through a decade-long experience of fearing what my whole life was going to be like and hating myself. And it took me 10 plus years to come to grips with that. And then all those behaviors replicated themselves into my 20s when I became a gambling addict. And so,
Mm-hmm.
I think when we can take a true, honest look back with clarity in our lives, now that we're on the right side of recovery, right?
Mm-hmm.
You can really see where this stuff comes from. So thank you for being vulnerable and sharing all the family story. Okay, so you're teaching now. You're in your what 30s at this point, late
Late
20s.
late 20s,
Okay,
yeah.
okay,
Early
all
30s,
right,
yeah.
all right. So now, what starts to happen from there, and where does gambling start to creep in?
So yeah, I met a man, and we were an insta couple. Like he was the date that never left. Like he came over and we had our first date, and we were together. And then he proposed after 3 months of dating, and we got married about a year and a half after that. Oh, but he proposed in Vegas because he
Mm,
was a big gambler. He was a
okay,
big gambler. He had what is it? When you go and they give you money, they just give you chips, like a marker or something like that. I don't know what it was.
okay,
Or like a line of credit or something in the
got it.
casino.
So he
So
was a high roller and
he was a high
had all the
roller.
got it. So you got like
Yeah.
comp rooms at the nice hotels, that kind of thing.
Everything was comped, everything was taken care of. And so yeah, so we went a couple times before we went and when he proposed, but that's where we were when he proposed.
Now I have a
We
quick
would go.
question. After you
Yeah,
met him, how quickly did he tell you he was a big time gambler?
it was pretty quick that I found out. But he, strangely enough, was not a compulsive gambler, to the point where, like, when we would go together, he would stop when he would have win, or he would felt like he was losing too much or whatever. Like he could stop and walk away. Yeah, I'm done. I've had enough.
Mm,
Me, I would just want to keep going. No, why
got
would
it.
we leave? Why would we stop? Let's keep going.
Got it. So
We're here.
he was a normal. he liked to gamble a lot, but he was a normal, controlled gambler, as we would call it, right? Okay.
If there is such a thing, he had more
Not a
control than I did, at
okay.
least.
Yeah, we
You
come in
know,
variations. Okay. All right.
yeah.
Okay, cool. All right. So you're living that life with him,
Living
right?
that life. So we got married, and then we were married a few years, and then we had a couple of kids, or I had a kid, my first son, and when I was 33. And then I had my second son at 35. And I would say that's when I started wanting to go to the casino by myself. When my
Mm.
kids were little, and I had everything I thought I had ever wanted in life, which was a husband and a family and a house and cars and the dog and everything. And I was still completely miserable and unhappy.
How
And
long
I,
were you
I
married before you had your kid?
3 years.
3 years.
So
And in that time, were you happy in that marriage, and or do you feel like these feelings were starting to already
yeah,
start?
no, I feel like I was happy in those first few years, and the reason I waited 3 years because I wanted to give it some time to have before I brought kids
Sure.
into the relationship. And yeah, I really thought I was happy. He was a good guy in a lot of ways. He was funny, he was smart, and he was crazy about me. So there were a lot of things that really were good in that relationship, but then there were some things that were difficult. And I didn't really realize them until later on. One of the things was he likes to talk a lot, and I love to talk. I could talk all day, all night, and everything, and I couldn't get a word in edgewise with him because he
Wow.
did all the talking, and I had to kind of just be silent. And I got lost. I just lost myself, and I became resentful, and that's when I started escaping.
Mm.
On Sundays, I would drive
Okay.
out to the casino, and he would watch the kids, and I would just play.
Now, do you remember like when you first were doing that, the Sunday drives to the casino solo? Like, did you have flashbacks to the recreational little bit of gambling you had done in your past, and like you had this taste of it, and it was turning into like this sudden thirst? Because all of a sudden you turned to gambling out of sort of nowhere, it sounds like, to escape. But do you know why you picked gambling? I guess is my question.
Oh, yeah. No, I don't know why I picked gambling. It was just like, oh, the casino's right down the street. Why don't I just go for a
Mm.
little while? I'll go for a few hours. And we had the money, it wasn't a hardship. So I thought, why not go? And then I really enjoyed it. And he wanted me to be happy. So he would let me go.
And since he was a gambler, he, of course, didn't see any problem with that being sort of Lori's time to
Right.
go do your thing, right? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So now you're going to the casino alone. What kind of games were you first playing?
Oh, I was always a video poker girl.
Got it.
Yeah,
Right
video
from the
poker.
get-go.
Yeah, well, when I would go to Vegas, I would play mostly roulette. That was my favorite
Okay.
game. But when I was going to the Indian casino by
Hmm.
my house, they didn't really have real roulette. And the thing I think, and I've heard, people call that, the crack of gambling and things. It's like so down and dirty because you're just constantly ding, 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 clicking and moving and
Right.
picking cards.
Did you
Mm.
find yourself? I think there's always two kinds of gamblers generally. It's the action gambler and the escape gambler. And I've often heard that individuals like yourself that gravitate towards slot machine play primarily are more looking for escape. It's the zone out
Absolutely.
of the machine. It's you and the machine, and you're just hitting buttons over and over and over and over again. Where me, like being a sports horse race, it was about the action of the game, getting lost in that activity. So it sounds like you were
Yeah.
on the escape side.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. It was never really about the action for me. It was just about, like, I don't have to think about anything at all. I don't
Mm-hmm.
have to feel anything at all. I am completely zoned out in what I'm doing. And it wasn't always just video poker. I played, other slot machines too. The fun, I love the Wizard of Oz, when Glinda would come wafting in on a
Mm-hmm.
bubble, it was like they do a really good job of making the slot machines enticing and attractive, and
Yeah.
they tap into that part of you. I mean, Wizard of Oz, I love that movie. I love everything about it, So
Right.
of course I'm going to want to play this game that
Right.
lets me escape into that fantasy world.
Right. Now, this is about what are we going back now from where we are today? Is this about 10 years ago when this starts for you or more than that?
No, this was more than 10 years ago. This was probably, well, so my son is 20. So
Oh my
this was,
goodness. Okay. Okay.
yeah, this was
Got it.
15, 17 years ago.
So we're the early 2000s at this point, about
The
2005,
early
6.
2000s. Yep.
Okay.
2005, 6.
Now,
Yep.
had online gambling presented itself to you at all, or you were only going to that casino at that point?
There was online gambling, and I didn't like it because I felt like it was rigged. And I I feel like all gambling is rigged. And
I
I
was
felt
gonna
like it
say,
even
the slot machines at that tribal casino
I
are
know.
also rigged.
I know.
Yeah,
I know. And I felt the same thing. I felt like it was all rigged. But I don't know, for some reason in
it
the
matters.
casino it wasn't quite as rigged as
Right,
online. So
right,
luckily I didn't really
right.
get hooked on online gambling that
Interesting.
much.
Well, and
I
plus for you, your story was, at least initially, you wanted to escape from the house.
I want to get out of
So
the house. Yeah.
you wanted to be somewhere. You didn't.
Yeah.
Yeah, me, I was locking myself indoors and just betting on sports and watching the games. So that online, so that was a different
Yeah.
experience for me. That's really interesting. Okay, so it just starts to the volume and the frequency of the gambling and the escapes to the casino. Is it that starts to just become more habitual at that point?
No, it was actually I had it under control at that time, I would say. When things really snowballed for me and I would say like became out of control, where it was after my divorce. So, at first I was escaping my marriage and escaping the feelings I was having of resentment towards my husband by going out to the casino. And then when we got divorced, I had my kids every other week. So I would have them for a week, and then they would go to their dad's for a week, and then they would come back, and we did this every week.
Mm,
And when I had them, I was 100% committed to them. I
mhm,
didn't date, I didn't gamble, I didn't do anything. I just took care of them. But as soon as they left me on that Friday afternoon, I would sit there and go, "What am I supposed to do with myself?
mm,
Where do I go? What do I do?" And
mhm,
that's when I would start going to the casino more and more. And I had no one to be accountable to. I
mhm,
had no one I had to come home for.
yeah,
And so I could just stay all
right,
night long,
right, right.
I could go for days at a time. And that's really when it started to progress to something that I was like, okay, I have no control over this. Like I'm a compulsive gambler. There was no doubt about it. And I knew that years before I actually got real help for
Mhm.
my problem.
Now, if you don't mind talking a little bit, the divorce, was that just multiple kinds of issues, or was there a particular thing that was going wrong that just couldn't be repaired?
So there came a time when the gambling escape wasn't quite enough for
Mm,
me and I needed something else. And so I actually turned to another addiction while I was married. And it's always hard to talk about, just because it's not something I'm proud of, but it's something that happened. I mean, it's just a reality. So I turned to other men. I guess that was my other escape, and that was something I think my husband had always told me if I cheated on him, he would leave
mm,
me. And
mhm,
I think somewhere deep down, I kind of hoped that would happen. Because it didn't seem like he was really gonna. The gambling didn't seem to be a problem. Nothing really seemed to be a problem for him to leave.
right.
And even though I didn't really want him to know about it, I think deep down somehow I just needed out of that marriage. I didn't know what to do. The thought of leaving my marriage never crossed my mind. I never thought
Mm,
about I'm just going to up and leave this marriage. I was like, no,
right.
but I'm like, wow, but I can be the perfect wife and the perfect mother as long as
Mhm.
I just have this right here.
So it's almost like the intentional action you took to have the escape of the marriage, and as opposed to just facing what it was and dealing with it on life's terms.
Hmm.
Yeah. Well,
So that's how the marriage ended. And it was,
okay.
there was
Okay.
no repairing that.
Okay. Well, thank you for vulnerability, sharing that. I know that was not easy, but again, you're not alone out there. There's many people living that story too.
Yeah,
And the kids at this point were how old?
they were little, six and
Okay.
four, something like that.
All right. So now you're divorced, and the custody is back and forth, and now you're got this downtime, and now you just start diving into the casino more.
More and more. Yeah, and I had huge guilt from the way my marriage ended and what I had done. And I felt complete shame, and I didn't feel like I deserved anything good in life because of what I had done. And so for years, I mean years and years, it was this self-destructive. I was still taking care of my kids. I was still working a full-time job, making six figures. I was still doing all these things that I needed to do to stay afloat by myself
Mhm.
without support from a family or friends or anything. But I was struggling to keep it together. And I would go gamble, and I was it's funny because I was a really lucky gambler. Like I won a lot. I
Mm,
just always gave it back. Whether it was that same day or days later, I always gave it back and then got deeper in the hole with the regular money. So,
mm,
you know, it was, and because I didn't have anyone to fall back on, I knew I had to be careful or I'd lose my kid.
mm, mm-hmm.
I didn't want to lose my house to then lose
Yeah,
custody of my children because they had nowhere to live.
right.
So I would go through periods of time, those countless vain attempts to prove we could gamble like normal people. I would go through
Interesting.
periods of time where I didn't gamble.
Like months, even?
Months.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah, I would go months without gambling,
Okay.
and I was fine. I
Like you
didn't miss
weren't
it. I didn't think about
obsessed
it.
missing.
Mm-mm.
Interesting. Okay. So you
Nope.
maybe had not yet crossed that invisible line we talk about into addiction.
Well,
Maybe.
yeah. Well, the thing is, though, if I was in front of a casino, I was going in. There was no way if I was in, like when I flew
Mm,
to New Orleans for a work conference, my hotel was right across the street from a casino.
hmm.
And I was like, well, I know I'm really not supposed to gamble. I don't really have the money, but I'm going to go.
Got it.
So, and that's
Okay.
kind of how it how it would happen. It was like if presented with gambling, I was going to gamble. But if I was
Got it.
just at home, as long as I didn't go in the
Got it.
casino, I was okay.
Got it. So if you were tempting yourself, as that item on our page
Yeah,
17 talks about, you're going in.
going
Interesting.
in.
Now you start to gamble more and more, and so where does this start to take you deeper?
So again, I'm only gambling when my kids aren't with me.
Hmm.
So I'm going usually Friday, Saturday, sometimes Sunday on the weekends when I don't have them. And the rest of the time I'm working, so I'm maintaining my job. But then, I was losing, and when I would lose, I would have to find ways to get money to pay my rent, to pay my bills. And I had a lot of jewelry. One thing my ex-husband did well was he bought me a lot of jewelry. So I was hawking a lot of jewelry to support my gambling habit and to, take care of when I would go and overindulge. And I went to go sell some jewelry, and he wasn't going to give me as much as I had thought I could get for it. And I just had a total breakdown, like a complete breakdown, because I wasn't going to be able to pay my rent. I didn't know what I was going
Mm-hmm.
to do. I lost the jewelry because, I did sell it anyway. I just didn't get as much money for it. So I got on the phone with a girlfriend, and I was just a friend who gambles that I know. And she was, I was talking to her about it, and I was sobbing, sobbing, sobbing. And I'm like, I just don't want to live anymore. I just
Mm,
can't do this anymore. And I took a bottle of Xanax and tried to go to sleep, you know, and ended up in a mental hospital. I mean, if it doesn't sound that bad, it really is. An LA County mental hospital is not anywhere you want to be. It was horrible. It was a horrible place. It was like jail, I guess. I've never been to jail, but it was what I would imagine jail would be like because you have no freedom, you have no rights. They took everything away, my phone, my chapstick, everything. And I spent about 3 days in that mental hospital with really crazy people, really people that were truly needing
mhm.
serious help. And I just wanted to get out. And I said, if I can just get out of here, I will not gamble again.
What
I
year
will
was
get
this,
myself
Lori,
together.
when this happened?
This was, I'm so bad with years, but this
Okay.
was but way
Around.
before I came to GA.
Okay.
So this was probably about 4 years before I came to GA. So I would say 2018,
Okay.
17. something like that, probably.
Okay.
Yeah,
And so
probably
your
2017.
your boys were teenagers now.
Teenagers,
Did they have a
teenagers.
sense at that point of what was happening with you, or you
None.
completely hid all of it from them? They
I
know
hid it
you
all from
gambled at
them. They
all.
had no idea I gambled. They knew I didn't always have a lot of money sometimes, but they didn't know why.
Mm,
They didn't know. And when that happened and I was in the hospital, I was supposed to get them. I had to call and say, I'm in the hospital. I didn't tell them what hospital. I didn't tell them for what. But I think that was the first time they had some kind of an inkling that maybe there's something going on with mom. And when I got out of the hospital, I was determined to not gamble anymore.
hmm
I think, if I remember correctly, and my memory is hazy around this time, but I think that was when I went to my first meeting and it was not a good experience. And I said, I'm going to try to do this on my own. And I tried to do it on my own. And I went 2 years without gambling, without any support. But then, like I said, I think I went somewhere and there was a casino and I walked in and that was it.
All right, we're going to take a break there. And then when we come back on the other side, we'll get to where Lori's maybe rock bottom was related to
Yeah.
gambling. And then we're going to talk a whole lot about the much brighter side of the story, which is the last couple of years in recovery. So we're going to continue with this really, really awesome, powerful interview with Lori in the Gambling Recovery Lounge. Stay tuned. Welcome back into the Gambling Recovery Lounge. All right, we are going to continue on with this really, really powerful story with Lori. So, Lori, I want to just take a step back because you talked about it, and I feel like I kind of not glossed over it, but rushed through it too quickly. And I think we hear a lot about, particularly in gambling addiction, being by far the addiction that causes the most suicides and suicide attempts. And you talked about this moment that landed you into this mental hospital where you made a conscious decision to take a bottle of Xanax in and what you hoped would be, if I heard you right, but please clarify, that you wouldn't wake up the next day. Is that right?
Yes, that is right. I didn't feel suicidal. It wasn't like I wanted to die. I just wanted to stop hurting so much. And I didn't know how to stop the pain other in any other way. It seemed like the best solution is to just go away, just to kind of sleep, go drift off to sleep and not wake up. Yeah.
And had you
Yeah.
done related to that pill any kind of like research that if you consumed so many that it could lead to something like that, or that was just what you had with you
That
and that's what you did? Okay.
that's just what I had with me. I've had I because of the trauma experience in my childhood and the mental illness that runs in my family.
Mm-hmm.
I've battled depression my whole life and I take medication for it and I've had a Xanax prescription for years. I've never abused it, never
Mm-hmm.
had a problem with taking too many pills, anything like that for years until
Mm-hmm.
that day. And then that day, that's just what I had. And
Wow.
that's what I decided to do out of the complete depths of despair. And so it's really interesting to me when I do hear about other people that are compulsive gamblers and how common it is to either commit suicide or attempt to commit suicide. It's tragic.
Do you remember when you woke up, whether it was that same day or the next day, how you felt when you actually woke up compared to what your mindset was when you took the bottle?
I remember waking up in a ambulance
Mm-hmm.
and my arms were strapped. I was restrained. And I woke up and I didn't know where I was. And I asked, and I was very groggy. I could barely speak. I really don't know how many pills I took, whatever was in the bottle. And so I could barely put a sentence together. But I remember trying to ask, why am I tied down? And the woman in the ambulance said, well, you're a danger to yourself and to others. So you have to be restrained. And I thought, I'm a danger to anybody. I didn't make the connection, that I had
Mm-hmm.
what I had just done was so dangerous and so
Right.
severe. I mean, I absolutely could have perished at that time, and that really wasn't what I wanted. Like I said, I really didn't want to end everything. I just didn't know what else to do to stop the
Wow.
pain.
Um, and did your kids know at that time what had happened, or did that come out later for them?
I don't know if my kids know to this day that I tried to take my own life. I don't remember. I don't think I've ever told them. There aren't many people that I have told. It is part of my story, but it's not something that I really share or talk about in my recovery story, not for any real reason and not even out of shame or embarrassment or guilt, but just I don't think about it really,
Yeah.
I forget sometimes, but it did. I mean, gambling
Okay.
took me to the lowest steps,
Yeah.
but I still gambled after that.
Yeah. So let's get to that.
That would
Thank.
have been, yeah.
Yeah.
You would
Yeah.
think that would be the lowest. That would be the turning point to
Right.
really make a difference.
Right.
And unfortunately, still, it wasn't.
It wasn't enough. Yeah. So you talked before the break about so you spent 3 days in the mental hospital. You were determined when you left there that that was going to be the last time you gambled, but then you get out and now you return to your quote unquote normal life. And so then what's the next couple of years like where you're gambling again? Does it get even progressively worse beyond that? All right, so talk about that whole
Yeah.
experience.
So after that, I finished up. I signed out of all of the offers that I was getting at the tribal casino that I would go to. I said, I don't want to get any more promotions. I want to be off your mailing list. I don't want any part of this anymore. And I didn't go for for at least a year, maybe, like I said, maybe 2 years. And then COVID hit. And I thought, I wonder if the casino is open. I don't know what made me think it, but I was like, I wonder if they're open.
Mm,
And I looked and they were. And I'm like, well, what if I just go? And so I ended up going to the casino during COVID, I think as a way to cope with the fact that I was isolated and
isolated.
alienated and stuck at home all the time.
So that's yeah, five. So that starts 5 years ago about COVID, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And so you had gone though to that point a couple of years self-willing, not gambling. And
Mm-hmm.
I think you had mentioned before the break, you did go to one GA meeting prior to that,
I
and you
I
didn't go
did.
back. You were just set. You just stopped gambling, but you weren't doing any meetings at all.
Right. So I went to a meeting and I didn't like it. It was hotter than Hades in that room. And I thought, I know I'm a compulsive gambler, but does this have to be my penance? Do I have to be like in hell? Like it felt horrible. And then I didn't know the structure, I didn't know anything. And so when they called on me to share, I wasn't ready. It was early on in the meeting and I just wasn't ready. And then
Mm.
towards the end, I'm like, oh yeah, I'll share. And like, oh no, you can't share. You missed your time. That's it. Forget it. So I
Oh
was a
wow!
little bit
So you didn't get
put
the
off by
newcomer
that.
experience that we are
I
so
didn't get the
accustomed to.
newcomer.
Oh, okay,
No,
okay,
I did not get the newcomer experience. And I felt really, I thought, this is not for me. I don't like these people and I don't want to be around them and I'm not coming back.
right. Oh,
I'm doing this on my own.
okay,
And I thought I
interesting.
could do it on my own.
And you went a couple now in that couple of years when you stopped, do you feel like you were still obsessing and thinking a lot about it, or it kind of was like out of sight, out of mind, and you were fine?
It was kind of
Interesting.
out of sight, out of mind, and I was fine.
Huh.
Yeah. It's interesting because I hear people, in meetings talking about how even when they weren't gambling, they were thinking about gambling. That
That was
wasn't,
me. Yeah,
yeah,
for
that
sure.
wasn't me. That
Wow.
wasn't me. I didn't think about gambling all the time. My big problem is once I started, I wouldn't stop.
You wouldn't stop. You
I
could
wouldn't
not
stop.
stay stopped.
Mm-mm.
So what did you replace in those couple of years? What were you replacing gambling with in your life?
That's a good
Hobby
question.
wise or whatever.
People would always ask me, "Do you have any hobbies?" I'm like, "I gamble." That was my hobby.
Right,
I
right.
didn't
Well,
know.
that's why I
I
asked that
didn't.
question.
I didn't know what any other hobbies were. It's like
Right,
no.
right.
I would say I was single, and I
Hmm.
probably was dating. That was
Got it.
probably my other fix
Okay,
was men,
got it.
and dealing
Okay,
with that. Yeah, but it
okay.
was but then I bought a house, right? Like I was able to save money, so I bought a house, and I was so excited. And I'm like, I have to be really careful because I can't afford to lose my house.
And that was
So
before
I
COVID,
I bought my house at right in the middle of COVID.
in the middle of COVID. Okay.
Yeah, like 2020, 2021.
So, but in the early parts of it. Okay.
Right, early part, like right,
Got it.
yeah.
Okay. So you say, so COVID hits, you now, you dip your toe back into the casino.
Start saving
So
money towards a house.
got it.
Went back to the
Okay.
casino, lost that down payment.
Oof.
So had to tell my realtor, I'm gonna wait a little while to buy a house.
Oh,
Didn't tell him why, just said I'm just gonna wait a little while. So then I had to wait and save up again, a few months, got that ready, bought the house, and then I was like, okay, this is my motivator to never gamble again.
okay.
Stop. And then it got really bad because I couldn't stop. And then that's when I, took money from my son, and that was the beginning of the end when I realized now I need to do something. And I knew GA existed. So I was like, let me see if I can give this another try.
So
Um,
you would so leading up to your last bet, which was December of 2022, there was this incident where you stole from your son. Do you
yes,
want to give us a minute about what that experience
yeah,
was? Yeah.
yeah. It was the same thing. I was in Palm Springs for work for a conference, not to gamble, just for
Hmm.
work for a conference. But there's a casino right there, walking distance. So I'm like, oh, I'll just go to the casino, spend a little time. And then, of course, I lost all my money. And what had happened in the past when I would lose all my money is I just needed to get more money to win it back. That's how it worked.
Hmm.
So I just need more money. But once I had no more money, I at that time I had access to my 17-year-old son's bank account because he was in high school. So we shared, he had his own account, but I was on my digital interface. So I could see, and I could transfer and I could manipulate his money. I had control.
Hmm.
But he also had it as well. So I was like, well, I'll just take a little bit of his money and I'll pay it right back and it'll be fine.
Mm.
And, I just kept going and losing it and going and taking out more money and losing it and going back. And I was only doing little chunks of money at a time because I didn't want to take too much. But after about, 20 trips to the ATM,
Wow.
I wiped out his whole bank account. And there was no way I could fake that, and that's the other thing. A lot of people talk about the lies that they told. I really didn't have to lie to anyone because I was by myself. I was
Yeah.
really only lying to myself, but I'm not a very good liar. Like, I just not, I never have been. So I had to tell him, and I told him, and I remember him saying, Mom, that was a lot of money. And I'm like, yeah, it was a lot of money, but I will pay you back and I did. In 2 weeks when I got paid again, I paid him back
Hmm.
and I apologized and I said I would never do it again.
Hmm.
And that was in March of 22.
Hmm.
And then I guess in June, I think I went to another tribal casino and ended up taking money from his account a second time. And
Wow.
that really was like, okay, he was really mad. And I was really disgusted with myself. And that's when I was like, that was the beginning of the end for me. I still went a few times after that. And then I actually came in to the program on a winning streak, but I knew it was not going to last
Hmm.
because I know no matter what I do for me is I will just go back and not stop.
So I was going to ask you, so when it happened again in June and you had to tell him I did it again,
Yeah.
did he say, Mom, like you got to get help? You have a problem. Like, did he understand at that point how severe gambling was for you, or he just thought you just loved to gamble, but it really wasn't setting in as an addiction?
I don't know if he knew that there was even such a thing as a gambling addiction. I
Okay.
don't know if he what he understood at that point. I just know that he couldn't understand why my I had taken his money without asking. What I did was completely wrong. I mean, I stole from my child
Right.
without asking. I took his money, and even though I paid it back immediately, it doesn't take away from the damage that I did. And that second time, I called his girlfriend at first before I called him, and I'm like, he's gonna kill me. He's gonna be so mad. And she's like, no, it'll be okay. this sweet little girlfriend, she ended up giving me like $100 so that I could have food, for the week.
Mhm.
But yeah, so I knew I couldn't do that again. If I knew if I took my son's money again, I might do irreparable damage to our relationship, and I
Mhm.
really didn't want that to happen.
Mhm.
So I decided, I I had to I had to stop. And I had a therapist prior that I'd gotten through the free
Yeah, Cal
through the
gets.
web. Yeah, you
Yeah.
can get
Mhm.
free counseling.
Yep.
So I did that. And she was a great lady, but she wasn't strict enough. Yeah, a little bit
I don't
too
know if I told
lax.
you this. My therapist also through the Cal Gets free program. She told me right away you should go to GA.
Yeah.
So I wasn't hearing it though. Not it took me a year and a half to listen to what she actually had said.
Well, I fill out the paperwork every week, and it was like, did you
Right.
go to any meetings? Nope. Are you going to go
Right.
to any meetings? Nope.
Right.
I was like, that's
Yep.
not going to be part of my recovery.
That's right. That's right. Okay, so you're seeing this there. So this is so June is when that happens. The second time you
Mhm.
stole from your son, you pay him back again. You don't get to your first GA meeting till December. So what's that 6 month period?
So that period was just going and once or twice a week to gamble. But when I went, I'd stay 10, 12, 14, 16 hours. Um, but I didn't ever take for my kid again, which was a good thing. But
Mm-hmm.
because like I said, I would win. So I would just win and go home and then go back and play. And sometimes I would dip in and sometimes I would lose it all. I mean, I always tell this, to people, the old timers that have 40, 50 years, they don't know about the gambling of today. But I was like, yeah, you hit a jackpot over a certain amount of money, you get a taxable form that you have to pay taxes on.
Mm-hmm.
And there were times I would go to the casino and I would walk out of there with 10, 50, a stack of 10 or 15 taxable documents
Mm-hmm.
and not a dime to my name. So I have won, quote unquote, all of these jackpots,
Yeah.
but I just put it all right back in to
Yeah.
keep playing, to sustain
The
the
high,
habit,
the
the
habit,
high, to
the
keep me
escape. Yeah.
from, thinking about my real life and my loneliness and my sadness and what
Yeah.
was missing.
Very common for so many of us. Oh boy.
Hmm.
Okay. So what happens now that gets you finally into the GA room after your
I,
last bet?
yeah, I think so. October and November, I was going not to the big casino really, but just the local card room by my house, which is 5 minutes from my house, which didn't give me nearly the same thrill as the slot machines, but it was something.
Hmm.
So I was going there and I was just looking around. I'm like, these people are gross. This room is gross. This environment is disgusting. Why am I here?
Mm,
Why am I spending my time here? And I'm like, I need to stop gambling. There's no way I can keep doing this. I'm going to lose my son. I'm going to lose my house. I have to stop. And I don't know how to do it by myself. So I think my last bet was it was probably November 28th, or it might have been Thanksgiving. My last bet might have been I think I did. I got up. This was it. Okay, now I
okay.
remember. I got up in the morning at like 5 or 6 in the morning. I woke up on Thanksgiving. My kids were asleep, and I went to the casino, the card room by my house, and I spent Thanksgiving Day playing cards with some of the most disgusting people that you ever want to see. And I was like, I'm like, this is the low. It really was. Like, this was lower to me than like ending up in the hospital. And it was finally like, okay,
Interesting.
I'm done. I'm done.
And it was so it had nothing to do with whether you even lost or won that card playing set. It was the experience and what it felt like to you that was your bottom. Sounds like
Yeah.
it's a unique experience. Okay, so you leave there and say
I
this is going to
left.
be it.
This is it. I'm done. And I knew about the meeting, by my house,
Uh-huh.
2 minutes from my house. And I think I looked it up to make sure it was still there. And I strolled in And
Was that the
my life.
Thanksgiving night meeting that night?
No, it was December
It was
1st. It
December. Okay.
was
So it
the
was
week.
the
It must
following
have been
week.
the week after. Yeah,
Okay.
it was the week after. I didn't know about that meeting. And it was the week after. And I walked in and it was a birthday for two people who had significant time in the
Mhm.
program. And I just heard, story after story of joy and love and hope and recovery and fellowship and all the things that were missing in my life.
Mhm.
And I thought, this is what I want for my life. I want a community of people that care about me and
Mhm.
that are rooting for me. And that was my first meeting, well, my first real meeting.
Yeah, quite different than the one you went to like 5 years before, and you're like, what the hell? What is this? I'm not coming back to this nonsense. Okay.
Nope.
Wow. All right. So you had that incredible real first. So did you then do the real newcomer stuff with the 20 questions at that meeting?
So they don't do that. They don't do the
Oh,
newcomer stuff at
oh,
these meetings.
okay.
They
All
don't
right.
read the 20 questions and stuff, which
Got
I
it.
think would be very cool.
Oh, okay.
But I did share, and I did get a newcomer packet that they
Okay.
gave me.
So you didn't do the 20, you, have you not gone through the 20 question experience
Oh,
or
I
you
have.
did? Okay.
Yeah,
Got it.
I have gone through the 20 question experience. Yeah. Because I also started going online at the same
Oh, okay.
time and
Yeah.
doing Zoom meetings.
Okay.
And they did the 20 questions in
Okay.
those meetings.
Were you a 20 for 20 right away?
I was like a 19 for 20.
Got out of one of them, huh?
I got out of one of them, but I don't know that it was because it wasn't accurate or if it was because I didn't understand the question. I
Okay.
think it was the one about were you reluctant to use gambling
Money for normal
money for
expenditures?
normal expenditures and was
Oh,
like,
yeah. What does that mean?
what does
Yeah.
that mean? I'm
Right.
like, there was gambling money. There
Yeah.
that was it,
That's what I did. Right. That was a normal,
Yeah.
or as I like to always joke, gambling was a normal expenditure.
Yeah,
It,
exactly. So
everything, all
no.
money was gambling money. So I don't know.
Yeah, but now I'm definitely a 20 for 20.
Got it.
So
Got it. Okay. All right. So that meeting starts your recovery journey. So what then? Now what's happening in your life?
so I was doing a Zoom meeting just about every night of the week. And sometimes I would stay on till all hours of the night, because the meeting would end, but then it would just the after meeting would go on. And so I was doing a lot of outreach as far as talking to people, calling people, anything I could think to keep me from wanting to gamble or going to gamble. Because even though, like I said before, it wasn't something that was always on my mind, it was never something that when it was on my mind, I couldn't do it. So now it's like, well, shucks, I want to gamble. Why can't I gamble? Why can't I? But I was like, well, I can't because I can't stop. I can't stop. So I have to not start. So how do I not start? And luckily at that first meeting, that first in-person meeting, a lovely woman came up to me and she said, page 17. And I didn't really know what she meant at the time. But then I went home with my envelope of goodies and I went through and I voraciously read everything in there. And when I got to page 17 of the combo book and I read through it, I was like, oh, this is what she means. And it's really, that has really been my barometer for how to handle my recovery is to follow what it says on that page. And in the beginning, I was hardcore meetings daily, three in-person meetings a week,
Hmm.
excuse me, and then Zoom meetings 2 or 3 times a week
Hmm.
for a good 3 to 6 months of my, in the beginning.
I'll piggyback off that because that was also one of the very first things I heard from longtime members was, there's a lot of new things that you can't quite grasp, like particularly for me, not having any kind of religious upbringing or spiritual awareness. So like the whole concept of God and higher power, which is prevalent throughout the program, that was really tough for me. And believing in anything really outside of myself was always hard for me. But the messaging I got right away was, don't worry about any of that. Keep coming to meetings.
Yep.
And then if you do nothing but focus on page 17 to the best of your ability, you're not going to gamble. And, nearly 4 years in now, for me, I never relapsed since I came into the program. And I really attribute it because I dove in right away and listened to what people told me. I didn't try to create my own program and, massage it in the way that I wanted it to be to fit my ego and all that stuff. So I just I just trusted what people said. And so it sounds like
Hmm.
you had similar great advice about that magical page that offers
It
like a
really,
whole guidebook to everything, you know?
it's true. It really is all you need is to follow what's there. You're absolutely right. And the therapist, I still was talking to her at that time when I first went back to GA.
Hmm.
And I told her I was going to meetings. And she said, well, this is what I want you to do. She's like, I want you to create some tools or some strategies that you're going to use when you have an urge to gamble so you don't gamble. And then I want you to have some consequences for yourself if you do go back and gamble.
Mm.
So it was easy to come up with some strategies of things to do to not gamble. But the consequence part was a little bit trickier for me. And one of the biggest things was, well, I'm going to have to go back to that meeting and I'm going to have to tell everybody that I gambled. And I'm going to have to look at their faces and see how they react. And that alone was a big motivator for me to not want to go back
Hmm.
because I felt like everybody in that room cared about me and cared about my recovery and wanted me to never gamble again. I know I would be disappointing people. And again, I know we do this for ourselves, not for others, but that accountability piece was huge for me.
Hmm.
It was really important for me to a big part of me stopping.
I totally agree with you. I've thought about it the same way. How I would feel mortified to have to go back. And I mean, look, I know there obviously there's plenty of success stories of people with long-term amazing recovery who did go through battles of relapse. So it's far more common than uncommon for sure.
Right.
But I just decided right away it wasn't going to be my story. I was going to be one of the uncommon ones that did it right away. And not that we can ever say we're never going to gamble again. So I fully
Right.
do grasp and believe in one day at a time. But my mental process of this and how I feel about this is that I don't have another recovery in me. And maybe it's as long as my addiction lasted and the amount of damage I did to myself, to other people financially, and where I'm at and how my life's changed. If I got to that place of a relapse, that means that I have fallen off so badly on all these other things that I don't think I could come back from it. I really don't. That's just the way I look at it. So
Hmm.
I treat it like it's life and death because for me, I really think that's where a relapse would go in some way for me.
I agree with you. I agree with you. And I feel the same way too. I don't want it to be a part of my story and my recovery. I want my recovery to be from here on out. And I'm 53 years old, so I'm not I mean I gambled a long, 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 long time.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like it's okay to stop it now. Like I did my gambling. I
Yeah,
had my time. I experienced it. I know exactly how it feels to win and I know exactly how it feels to lose.
yeah,
And I don't really need to do that anymore. I don't
yeah,
need that anymore. And I don't want that anymore because the lows were so, so bad,
yeah,
and like you said, the damage is so devastating. And I know what can happen. I know where that can lead me, and I don't want to go there. And
yeah.
we talked about the song, and my first song choice was actually going to be Somewhere Over the Rainbow from The Wizard of Oz
Mm-hmm.
because I've often used the analogy of, my life before recovery being in black and white and then my life after recovery being in Technicolor
Oh,
and
I love
you
that.
know changing so drastically. I like the Pleasantville one, in Pleasantville when it's all black and white and then they switch to color. Same, any movie that does that. That's how I feel like my recovery was. I was alive, I was smiling, I was sometimes laughing and happy even
Yeah,
before my recovery, but there was a deep, dark secret that I was carrying around with me and a deep, dark problem that I was
yeah,
carrying around with me
yeah,
that I don't have anymore. And so my life is exponentially better.
yeah. So I want to now pick your brain and chat about like a bunch of different stuff with recovery. So the first question I have, so obviously being female, and in this program, there's definitely, though I think, a trend towards more females being in than historically, there's still an imbalance. So as a female, breaking in the dynamic way in which you have, where you've gotten super involved with all facets of the program, right? What's your take on that whole component of being a female in the program? Has it caused you any difficulties? Has it made you even stronger because you're coming in under? It's still underrepresented compared to the male population. There's been a
Yeah.
number of females who have talked about how sometimes it's a struggle to be in a room predominantly with men, and sometimes all men and one female. So, can you talk a little bit about your take on all that, Lori?
Absolutely. Yes. Well, there's a couple of components to this issue, right? There's the fact that you're might be one of the only women in the room, what or just a few women in the room with a bunch of men, and that sometimes is a different dynamic. There's also that dynamic of, sometimes just because a man is in recovery and just because he has time in a program doesn't mean he's a great human being, or doesn't mean he doesn't have other issues. And
Mm-hmm.
sometimes what I have found is that there are some men in the program that will extend a warm, welcoming hand to a woman, a new woman in the program, with ulterior motives. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and that can be really problematic. So I had to in fact the first time I went, when I did go those years ago, and I don't really even consider it like relapsing because I never really got a day one or
I get it.
anything,
I get it. I totally
I
get it.
went and
No,
I was like, I don't understand.
yeah,
But I
you're
did
real
meet
good.
someone from there, and I felt like I was a little bit taken advantage of because I was so vulnerable and I was so low, and this person had time and recovery and money and all these things that I was wishing I had. And so I was kind of looking to him for guidance and support. And ultimately I felt like I got a little bit taken advantage of. And that turned me off for a while from the
Mm-hmm.
program as well, because and so I had to have real boundaries when I came in. I was like, I'm not gonna have a man sponsor.
Yep.
I am going to, look to the women and try to get close to the women as much as possible. But again, it's tricky with women sometimes because not all women are as embracing of as other women as we would
Mm.
hope.
Okay.
So it wasn't all sunshine and roses for me in the program in the beginning. I had a couple of incidents
Okay.
where I got yelled at by senior members and meetings, to the point where I could have just gone back out and said, I am never coming back.
Wow.
Things that would have easily pushed somebody away.
Mm-hmm.
But I was like, I need this. I need this. I'm not going to let someone else get in the way of my recovery just
Yeah.
because this person and I don't agree or don't see eye to eye or, whatever. I can't let that person get in the way of my recovery. I got to keep coming back
Yeah.
anyway.
Well, thank God you did stick.
I know.
Yes,
I
but and that
know.
probably, I would assume in retrospect you can appreciate having gone through it because it made you probably even stronger now in your recovery, having
Absolutely.
experienced that stuff. Okay.
And once a week I do an all women's meeting, which is so wonderful. Like
Oh, cool.
it's a Zoom meeting. It
Mm-hmm.
used to be in person, but it went to Zoom during COVID and it just stayed on Zoom. And now I think 90%, 95% of the people are out of the area. It's all women and I love it. There are some differences, obviously, between men and women in a lot of ways, but I think sometimes in recovery as well, and in the reasons why we gambled and in the way we gambled. I
Sure.
think that we talked about the action,
Yep.
right? I think there are more men that would talk about I just was in it for the action than
Right.
than women. More women
That's
would
right.
it's a more of an escaping. Not that there aren't both ends of the spectrum for each
Yep.
gender, but I think more as a norm, women are there and we're escaping and men can be escaping. Sometimes they're the big shot action
Yeah.
guys. So
Well, and I think
so I think it's
men,
nice.
yeah, I think men have more of a historical problem. I know me as well, not knowing how to properly handle emotions in general in life, not knowing how to be emotional, not knowing how to come from an environment where it's okay to talk, where it's okay to cry, where it's okay to be close to another man. Even me being a gay man, I didn't know how to emotionally be close really to men, which is what caused me to have so many emotional problems as I was trying to process my whole stuff. So
Hmm.
I think that's why men sometimes want to just dive into the action of it and attach themselves often to the sport of it because that's
Hmm.
sort of the whole what's ingrained in our culture naturally for men. So I think that you're totally right. Obviously, there's always exceptions to each, but I do think there's a predominance of the action versus the escape, a lot based on gender. I think that that's really true. Very insightful. So let me ask you a couple of questions about like this real successful components of recovery for you. Like we talked about page 17 broadly, but if you could pinpoint a couple of the things that really have been the difference makers more than anything else, is there a couple of things in your program that's really worked for you that you want to share?
Yeah, I think, well, obviously the very, meetings, right? You go to meetings and using the telephone is talking to people when you are feeling like whatever you're feeling, whether it's an urge to gamble or just feeling like life sucks at the moment, using the telephone or calling people or texting people, I think is so important. But there's other things on like getting involved in being of service. That was another thing. I know that's something you've done probably
Mm-hmm.
for early on in your recovery, and
Mm-hmm.
same for me. I think when I was hosting a Zoom meeting once a week, I had 3 months in the program, and I was hosting every week as
Mm-hmm.
on Zoom, and then I became secretary of my meeting pretty early in my recovery as well. And but that was so powerful for
Yeah.
me because that was another motivator to not gamble. If
Yes.
I go gamble, I won't be able to be secretary anymore.
Right.
And I like
Right.
being secretary.
Yeah, my first, well, very similar. I was hosting a Zoom meeting at about 90 days, and that was every week. And then my first in-person secretary service position was right at about 6 months.
Hmm.
And I
Yep.
felt the exact same way that that was such a powerful experience because I liked it, I was good at it, and people were counting on me to do something good. And I felt like such a failure for all those years of what happened to me going into the
Hmm.
program that it was like, oh, I'm finally of use to people in a
Yeah.
positive way. And that really was a game changer in my recovery, for sure. That service, I totally agree with you.
Yeah.
Um, when did a sponsor enter your recovery?
Yeah. I knew who I wanted for well, that's the tricky part too, as a woman, finding a sponsor, because there aren't very many options,
Yeah.
for, if you want another woman. And the few women around that have time often have multiple sponsees. So I was like, I knew who I wanted as my sponsor pretty early, but I was so afraid to ask her because
Mm.
I was afraid she would say no. And I was too fragile at that time
Don't want to
to
be
handle.
rejected.
I could not be rejected. I would have completely gone off the deep end and run right back to the casino. So I waited a while to ask her to be my sponsor. In fact, we were going out dancing and karaoke and doing all kinds of stuff as friends
uh,
before I actually asked her to be my sponsor. And then once I did, she was like, "Of course, I would love to be your sponsor." And it was like, "Why did I wait so long?" But getting a sponsor, yes, has definitely been an important part of it as well. And I think when I talk about using the telephone list and picking up the phone to call, like that's I would call my sponsor 90% of the time,
mm-hmm.
unless she wasn't available and it was really rough. But yeah, I think all of that is so important, and I think where it's not emphasized enough, right? We don't emphasize some of those areas as much as I think we could,
Yeah.
or even delineate what does that mean? What does it even mean to be of service?
Yeah.
And get involved. What does that look like? I didn't know about that I could be a part of intergroup meetings
Mm-hmm.
unless just as anybody. Yeah, and I didn't even know really I was supposed to go till I became a secretary.
Yeah. and I happened to be lucky in that because the meetings I was first going to were kind of the part of the town that where those meetings were very integrated to the bigger
Hmm.
inner workings of the
Hmm.
program. So I just was connected to those people right away. They just started, including my sponsor, pulling me into it, going like, just
Hmm.
start coming to this and just get involved that way. So I was fortunate, but yeah, I mean, look at you kind of backdoored it almost because you didn't have the infrastructure right away that naturally led you into it.
Hmm.
You've kind of fell into it, and then you're like, oh, I like this, and I'm really good at this too, right?
Yeah.
For
Yeah.
sure. Oh yeah, you were like you're a powerhouse as soon as you kind of came into it. We all saw it, and it's just like, oh wow, where did Lori come from, and why haven't we seen her before? So it was like, yeah, that was really cool. What about the steps? I don't know how far you've gotten into the steps, if you've worked those, and where do you see that in the influence of your progress of
Yeah, that's a good question. You had mentioned the God part, being tricky for some people, and it was definitely tricky for me with, my spirituality and my upbringing and not really sure what I believed. And so that was hard for me, the higher power part. I didn't know what I felt. So I didn't have a higher power yet for like probably the first year of
mm-hmm.
recovery. I wasn't quite sure what my higher power was, if it was the meeting, if it was, whatever it was. And
Mm-hmm.
then I realized, I don't know if it's a cross for me between God or Jesus or whatever, but I definitely do have a higher power. I definitely do feel like there have been times when I've been lifted up where prior to the last year, I always thought I did it myself. I
Mm-hmm.
always thought I
Mm-hmm.
was responsible for how I felt and what happened to me. But there's times when I know that I had to have help somehow. So as far as working the steps, my sponsor and I did go through the steps last year. She actually moved away, broke my heart, and moved out of state, but we
Mm-hmm.
still talk daily. So,
Awesome.
and we can Zoom and everything.
Yeah.
So we did the steps. We worked through them, went a week until we got through it. But I don't know. Like some people, it's like it's all about the steps for them. Like
Mm-hmm.
that's the biggest part of their recovery. And for me, other than really, admitting and understanding that I was powerless over my gambling and then trying to help other compulsive gamblers, everything else kind of in the middle is, I really work hard at making amends if I do something wrong or I
Mm-hmm.
do something I feel like I should apologize for. I think that's really important to just live the best life I can and to, if I make a mistake, to make those amends.
Mm-hmm.
But I would say that page 17 has had more of an impact on my recovery
Yeah.
than the steps. But the
Yeah.
steps are important for sure.
Yeah. And yeah, I think one of those things on page 17 is sponsorship and step work. So yeah, it's
Yeah.
it's one of the tools. And yeah, I think everybody, it's why this program's so great. Like it's not always a one size fits all, and not everybody works it all in the same way, but there's many different ways to get to a beautiful place compared to where we were before.
I
So
agree so wholeheartedly. And it's interesting, you and I coming in relatively recently, the difference, because for many people, it is one size does fit all. You need to do this, this, and this, and this, or it's not
mhm,
going to work.
mhm,
And they feel that way. They believe that, and
yeah,
I have no problem. I mean, that's okay, but I don't. I just disagree. I think that what works for you may or may not work for someone else, and someone's recovery may have multiple relapses in it. Someone's
yep,
recovery may not have any relapses in it.
yep,
And I think that as long as you're not gambling, whatever works for you is
yeah.
okay with me.
Yeah, I have a good example story of that. I wasn't a year in yet, but I had a sponsor. I was starting to work steps, and then I started taking on a couple of sponsees. But I was maybe through step three, and was working on four. Four is a long step. It's a long. First, depending how you work it, it can take a long time.
Yeah.
And I remember having a long timer say to me, "Hey, you may not be the best sponsor if you haven't gone through the steps yourself completely. I'm not sure that that's a great idea." And I listened and I considered this person said, and it was a person I value the relationship with a lot, and guy's got tremendous recovery, but I just had an instinct that that wasn't right for me, that
Hmm.
I had value in my experiences and my ability to have human relationships and the messaging based on what I had learned to that point. And so I continued to take on more sponsees, and what I made sure I always did was stay ahead of where they were in their step work, so that I had gone through the experience myself, so that if I'm asking them to do a certain assignment or writing related to step work, that I've at least gone through that experience, you know. So if I had listened to that person, I could have gone multiple years, which it took me to do the steps,
Hmm.
before I offered to accept anybody to be a
Right.
sponsee. And I would have gypped myself out of a lot of recovery because of that. And I could have affected several other people who saw something in me to ask me. And so I think it's another example of how it really is subjective. There's no one way, no best way, and everybody has their own take on it, and that's okay. But we don't have to agree to everything, and you know, there's many different ways to get there, right?
I agree 100%.
Yeah. So, is there one thing right now in your recovery where you're like, I wish this was better. I wish I did this part of it better, and this is something I really want to be working on.
I don't know. That's a really tough question to think
Okay.
about because it's like, oh no, I've done everything perfectly. No, that's certainly not the case. But I do feel like I have been, in these last 2 years, really 100% wholeheartedly into recovery. I was ready. When I came, I was ready to make a major life change. And I
Hmm.
have made that life change and I have seen the positive repercussions of that.
Yeah.
And I just want to keep going. Like, I just want to keep going and growing and evolving. And I would love to be a sponsor to someone. I would love to have a sponsee. I think that's one thing that I was asked early on in my recovery and I didn't feel ready.
Mm.
6 months in, a girl who had more time than me was like, will you be my sponsor? I'm like, I don't know what I'm doing. I was like, there's no way I can be your sponsor. I said, I
Right.
will help you. I will be your accountability partner. I will be here anytime you want to talk to someone. And then she wanted to gamble. She just wanted to keep gambling. And I said, well, I
Mm.
can't, I can't, I'm not going to turn my back on you, but I'm for my own recovery. I can't hear about your stories of gambling. So if you want to stop gambling, I'm happy to continue our
Right.
conversations.
Yeah.
So
Well,
I think,
someone's going to appear for you at the right time, and you'll both be
well, these
ready. And
women
that.
show up, but they never come back. They come
Mm.
to the meeting and I get so excited and I'm like, not
Yeah.
that that I would be a sponsor, but just, that here's a
Right.
woman, that I could maybe help
For sure.
along the way. So I always make sure that I highlight my number on the phone list when I give them the new packet. And
Hmm.
I try to get them to come back, but it's the tricky part.
Yeah. For sure. Well, I know for sure with what's happening with gambling in our society and all the stuff, we're going to keep
They're
having
gonna,
more and more people. So it's
they'll be
probably not going to
coming.
be long before you're gonna have that situation. And then, so I want to ask, you met your husband in these recovery rooms, right? So do you want to talk a little bit about that, and then just kind of how that evolved?
Yeah, it's so wild how this happened. I
Mm-hmm.
didn't necessarily want to get married. I just wanted someone, to have a relationship with.
Mm-hmm.
And I was having the hardest time. And people would always say, well, Lori, when you least expect it, when you're not looking, that's when you'll find someone. And I never bought that because I thought I'm always looking. So I didn't think that I was ever going to find anyone. And then I was doing that Zoom meeting that I was the host of, and he came on and I said, if you want to share, raise your hand. Either raise your real hand or your virtual hand. And he sent me a message. He's like, I don't know how to raise my virtual hand. Can you tell me?
Uh-huh.
And I was like, who doesn't know how to raise their hand in Zoom? Like, there's
That's
not
so
that
funny.
complicated. So I stopped the meeting and I explained. So anyway, I gave him my number out of, because he was new to recovery
Mm-hmm.
and I thought I could help him along.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't know if he was married. I didn't know if he was straight, gay. I didn't
Hmm.
know anything
Hmm.
about him. And there was no romance. I wasn't like, oh, he's
Hmm.
hot. It
Hmm.
was just, here's somebody in recovery. Let's extend a hand. So we
Hmm.
started texting that way. He was in Pennsylvania. I was out in LA, and we just started texting, and a friendship evolved. And then more than a friendship evolved. And I said, well, hey, I'm never leaving California. So if you want this to happen, would you ever move here? He's like, well, it's always in my dream to live in California. So I said, well,
Hmm.
let's see whether this is going to go anywhere or not. So I
Okay.
ended up flying out there to meet him. And my sponsor was like scared. What if he's a
Right.
killer? What if this happens? What if you never
Right.
come back? I'm like, no, he's a great guy. I'll be fine. And
Yeah.
come to find out, his friends were like, who is this lady? What if she's just after who knows what? Not like he had any money. So I don't know what they were worried about. But anyways, so yeah. So I went out there, we met, and we totally hit it off. And a year later he moved out, and a few months after that we got married. And so, he just celebrated his 2 year clean and from gambling the other day, and I did, mine 2 years, 3 months
Yeah,
ago.
so
So
that's interesting. So your timeline is just a few months apart.
yeah,
That's amazing. Wow. And now, so he moved into the house that you had,
he
and
moved into my house. Yeah.
okay. And how's the relationship with your sons?
Oh my God, they love him. They
That's
just
great.
love him, and he loves them, and it's so wonderful. I
Awesome.
mean, yeah, it's great.
And
It's really great.
their involvement, I think you've mentioned to me they've gone to like your birthday celebration meetings at for GA. That's total. That must
Yeah,
have
they
been amazing to see
it
them. Yeah.
it was. They came to my first birthday anniversary
Hmm.
last year, and it was just so great to have them. And then we do the Thanksgiving meeting.
Hmm.
I had them go to this year because that's the only meeting that non-members can share.
Right.
And I wanted to give them an opportunity to share if they wanted to. If
Yeah,
they didn't
for
want to, they
sure.
didn't have to. But it was really neat. And what I heard when they did share was, just how dangerously close I was to damaging that relationship with my oldest son forever.
Yeah.
He shared about how had it happened again, he may not have forgiven me the third time. And,
Wow.
at the time I was like, oh, my kids will always love me and I can never really do
Yeah.
irreparable damage. But, I realized I absolutely could have.
Yeah.
And I'm so glad that I came to program when I did so that didn't happen.
Wow. So they're both of them are really super supportive of your journey, and then that's so cool. Can you just take a second to talk about so the dynamic that you and your husband have because you're both in recovery together? Can you talk about that dynamic? Because it's, I mean, I know there's a few other couples as well in that situation, but the vast majority of people are not in recovery with their spouse or their significant other. What's that like compared to other relationships that where somebody is not an addict, they can't relate to what somebody who is an addict in recovery is going through because they just haven't lived that experience. Can you talk about the dynamic of from a relationship standpoint and the difference between the two for you?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's really wonderful having a partner who's in recovery with me, because we can go to meetings together, we can share experience together. I mean, my favorite people are part of the program,
Hmm.
and my husband is one of my favorite people, and he's part of the program. So, it's really nice that I get to share that element of my life with him, and it is a huge element of my life, and he understands it, and he gets it, and we support each other. And you know I know that if I were to go out, it would impact him. And he knows if he were to go out, it would impact me. And
Hmm.
that helps us stay accountable to each other and to the program as well. I don't think I mean, I wasn't looking for a partner in recovery. I think
Right,
if I
right,
would have like asked, if you would have asked me, like before I met him, what's your ideal partner? I wouldn't have said someone in the program. I would have
right,
never thought that.
right.
But because I do have someone in the program, it is actually a wonderful thing for me. But I think you can have a lovely, amazing relationship with someone who's not in the program too.
Right.
It just might be a little bit harder about meetings, like you know understanding about the time commitment. And it is a time commitment,
Hmm.
that you're taking away from your partner. And I don't feel like his meetings that he goes to take away from us. And he doesn't feel like the meetings that I go to take away from us, because we know if we weren't in recovery, our lives, we wouldn't have each other.
Wouldn't have each other. Yeah.
We wouldn't have each
Yeah.
other.
Yeah, I think that's where it would be so beneficial is that you have somebody who's lived your experience in essence and knows the value of what you get out of it when you put enough into it. And yeah, I was just really super curious about that because I do think it makes relationships very challenging. I mean, I'm very lucky in that my partner, as many know, is dove into Gamanon for himself, and which has been a wonderful tool for him to kind of be able to have a similar recovery experience as I do. You're experiencing it from somebody who's been affected but hasn't gone through the disease themselves. But
Mm-hmm.
that's to me the next best route that somebody can take to try to empathize and really try to understand where somebody who's gone through a gambling addiction, um, for those of us that have gone through it and are now in recovery, to go down a program to be the support system, but also have a program that's geared at helping yourself, with or without the gambler in recovery themselves. That's also what's helped us be successful. But yeah, I was just super curious what that was like being in a relationship with someone who's literally in it with you,
Yeah.
in all facets. So that's pretty
It
cool. And
is. Well,
awesome.
and I go to two in-person meetings a week. He goes to one of those with me. He
Mhm.
doesn't go to both. I needed that. I told him, I said, this is my meeting. This one is my meeting.
Got it. Get out of
And
this
this is
room. You're
get
not
out of
welcome.
here. And this is our meeting. But he does go to that one when there's birthday, because he
Sure.
wants to be there to celebrate. And that's where people at that meeting have met him and they love him and they always ask about him. Where is he? Where is he? I'm like,
Right.
this is my meeting.
I
He is
love that.
not allowed here.
That's so funny. Wow.
Yeah, thank you.
Well, so I have one parting question, and then I'll turn it over to you for any final comments. But so for the newcomer out there who's listening, really struggling with their gambling addiction, or maybe they're a loved one of somebody who they're worried about and is in the grips of this disease, and they just don't see hope. They don't know how to stop gambling. What is Lori's sort of words of wisdom about how to just get started and try this?
Go to a meeting and share your story. Even if you only get 3 minutes or 3.5 minutes, go in and tell what happened, what brought you there, and listen to what other people have to say, and realize you're not alone. You're not alone, and there's a better way of life available for you without gambling. And gambling will only tear you down, bring you misery, destroy you. And I think one of the things that I feel really fortunate that I have realized pretty early on for me, that no amount of money would ever be enough for me to really stop and come out ahead. And I think that because of that, it's like, well, why would I even bother? Why even start again? Because it's just going to lead to the same vicious cycle of spending and losing and lying, right? And I just don't want that anymore. And there is a better way of life, a much better way of life without gambling. And anything I ever hoped I would achieve by could get or have by gambling, I can get or have by not gambling. Just by working my job. And it's interesting. I'm starting to see it's taking a while. The financial part has taken a little bit of time for me to really see some benefits. But 2 years in now, I'm starting to see positive the positive impact of my not gambling on my finances.
Mm-hmm.
And that is a help. That's a huge help to me. But it wasn't right away. I had
Yep.
thought, oh, I stopped gambling. I'm just going to have all this money now. And that's not what happened.
Right.
And I could have easily used that as an excuse to be like, oh, well, I'm going to go back because,
Mm-hmm.
my finances aren't any better. So why wouldn't I just go back to gambling?
Right.
But, you know, It's so dreadful, and the lows are so low, and I just didn't want that anymore. And for anybody who's struggling, there's such a better way of life without it. And it's one day at a time. One day at a time. Just do not gamble today. And if you feel like gambling, call someone, get on the phone, get on a meeting, and share. I think it's not enough to just go to a meeting and sit. I think you have to share, even if all you share is, my name is Lori, I'm a compulsive gambler, and this is
Mhm.
day one, or this is day three,
Right,
or this is day seven,
right.
whatever. Even if it's just something as simple as that, I think it really helps.
Great words of wisdom. Well, any final thoughts that we haven't? This has been awesome, but anything you just
Oh,
want to
no, I
leave the
love it.
audience with?
I want to thank you so much for this opportunity. It's something that is still not open and talked about enough as far as an addiction, as far as a problem. And you're right, it's only going to get worse. It's becoming more prevalent in our society. There's younger and younger people that are getting sucked into it, but there is help. There is help. There are alternatives. And my advice would be, don't let personalities get in the way of your recovery. You're not going to love everybody at every meeting, and not everybody at every meeting is going to love you,
Mm,
but you do have one thing in common, and that can really overcome a lot of differences. And
that's
they often talk about looking at the similarities and not the differences. And I think that's super important too. See yourself in that old timer. I see these young guys come in their 20s and 30s, and I see guys that have 40 or 50 years, and I think that was them
right.
back then. And that they can be that. These young guys can be that
Yeah,
someday and
right.
have that time if they stick with it.
Beautifully said. Well, thank you so much, Lori. It's super interesting to hear your whole journey and your story. And I know that there's going to be a lot of people out there that really resonate and benefit from this. So thank you for all the honesty and vulnerability. And like I said, I'm super proud of you, and I'm so glad our paths crossed. And I'm just so glad you're part of the fellowship here in the greater LA area, because you're making a huge impact. So keep knocking down those doors, keep being the squeaky wheel, because there's wonderful, wonderful things about the traditions of our program, but there are also opportunities to keep making it better, and it takes dynamic people like you to keep helping to do that. So thank you, and just keep at it. I love it. So for
Thank
anybody that
you.
yeah, for sure, for anyone who has a comment or question that you want to send in to either myself or for Lori, and I can relay it to her, as always, Eric, ERIC, and gamblingrecoverylounge.com. And that's a wrap on experience number 18 with Lori in the Gambling Recovery Lounge. Thank you all for listening, and we'll be back very soon with experience number 19 in the Gambling Recovery Lounge. Have a great day.